You're watching the VSL Aviation YouTube channel. I'm your host, Seth Lake. Welcome back. Today we are discussing all things ForeFlight, basically how to set up ForeFlight, best practices to use it, and also how to ditch this book right here. Now, I love ASA to death, one of my favorite publishers for aviation content, and they've been making the FAR-AIM forever. But the truth is, you really don't need to carry around this FAR-AIM anymore. Everything you need is inside ForeFlight, so I'm going to show you that as well. This is kind of an update to a video you may be familiar with that I did a couple of years ago that said just stop using the FAR-AIM tabbed out. So this is kind of an expanded version of that. So with that being said, let's get to it in ForeFlight. So following along on ForeFlight here, the first thing I'm going to show you is the global settings menu. You're going to tap on the three bars at the lower right hand corner and then the settings. So the first thing I like to point out about settings is that the search filter on settings is great. Anything you're looking for, you can type in here and it'll pull up the setting automatically. So for instance, I like to show my track vector. That's that little, I call it a turn noodle, but it's a thing in front of your aircraft that displays where you're going to be in a certain amount of time or distance. So I know that's called the track vector. If I type in TRAC, already it has track vector pulled up. And I can see my track vector is turned on, and then my track vector length, I can change it. Right now I've got it set to 60 seconds. I could change it to 2 minutes or 10 minutes or 50 nautical miles, but I like the 60 seconds because it shows where my airplane's going to be in 1 minute if I keep my current ground speed and vector. So I really like the track vector setting. The other thing I like is my distance rings. So distance rings, right now, those are off, so I'm going to turn distance rings on, and I've got them set to automatic nautical miles. Now, there's another place where you can turn distance rings and track vector on and off, but you can't change this setting there as easily, so that you can do that in the global settings menu. There's a lot of other settings on the global settings. Those are the two that I'm going to start out with. I'm going to point out a couple of other ones that might be helpful to you. If you're just starting out with ForeFlight and are used to the sectional, you can go to the map touch action and you're going to select bring chart to front with legends. You're going to turn that on. So with that on, we're going to go back to our map here and we're going to select our layer selector menu. That's that little tray in kind of the top left-hand corner of your screen. And we're going to turn on the US VFR sectional. And you can already see I've got a little bit of that legend that's showing there. And so the map touch action, if I tap on the map, it will pull up the sectional for where I just tapped, and that sectional's associated or corresponding legend, which includes the legend for all the symbols. So if you're very dependent on having those symbols and you want to have those a quick reference, that may be the easiest way. It also pulls up the special use airspace in that specific sectional and allows you to look it up there. Now there's other ways for you to access this data into ForeFlight. This is just one way, and it's a technique. I have mine turned off, but if you like the feel of a sectional and you miss having those legends, then that's a setting that you may want to have turned on. But I'm going to turn mine back off because there's other ways that I can find that information on the aeronautical layer. Okay, scrolling through here, a lot of other settings. Some of them are really cool. Some of them, just turn them on and off, and you can kind of discover what they are. The important thing to remember here is if there's a setting in here that you're like, I wonder what that does. Let's look at something that, breadcrumbs. So you may not know what breadcrumbs mean. So if you run into that, go to your documents section of ForeFlight. So go to your documents. You want to go to your main catalog here and open up the ForeFlight catalog, and then go to the ForeFlight Mobile Pilot's Guide. And then hit the search bar at the top right-hand side of the screen, and you have three options on every search bar in ForeFlight. You can search, word search there. You can go to the middle one, which is contents, and that pulls up a chapter. Or you can go to your bookmarks, and that's a way to search bookmarks that you've made as a user. So for this, we're just going to go to word search, and we're going to search bread. So here we are. We can find, hey, there's breadcrumbs. Looks like the table of contents, and we're going to go down to, we'll just click on that first one, that breadcrumbs, and it tells us, hey, that's a link to page 82, and if we tap on this, it takes us right to that page 82, and it will tell us what breadcrumbs are. It's hyperlinked to the chapter on breadcrumbs in page 297, but I was able to find that information really quickly using the search function with that Alpha 1 document in the ForeFlight Documents Library, which is your ForeFlight Mobile Pilot's Guide. Everything about ForeFlight Mobile Pilot is in this guide right here. So I'm going to show you a couple other guides that you might find useful, but that one for sure, okay? So back to our settings. I'm going to show you one more trick. At the very top of your settings, you'll see 3 buttons and a slide bar. That's for the dim. You can dim the app within the app without dimming your iPad's brightness. So if it's too bright, if your iPad's too bright, you can turn it down your iPad. If it's still too bright, you can turn down the app further. Now there's 3 app themes below that for light, dark, and system. I have mine set to system, but you can set it to light or dark. Now let me show you what system does. System means that if I change my iPad to darkness or dark setting, then my ForeFlight app will follow what my system is set at. So the best way to change your iOS system, and we're going to talk about an iOS feature here. This isn't ForeFlight, this is iOS. We're going to slide down from the top right. So just take your finger, slide down from the top right. And this is your, I think it's called the systems tray. But up at the top of this, you'll see a little plus button. I want you to tap on that. And then you're going to add to control center. So that's what this is called, the control center. On the control center option, when you hit add, you're going to see a thing that looks like kind of like a little Death Star. So you're going to tap on that little Death Star thing and add that to your control center, and then just click away. And now watch what happens. When I tap on the little Death Star, it takes my whole iPad to dark mode. And since ForeFlight is set to system, ForeFlight goes into dark mode. So that's really useful, especially if you're going, you want to change everything to night mode, or you just like the dark mode. Maybe it's easier on your eyes, whatever. So I just thought I'd show you that useful setting there. All right, further on down the settings menu, we have a traffic option for high distant traffic, and traffic breadcrumbs. I really like to have both of those on because I don't like the cluttered appearance when I have ADS-B high distant traffic off. Then that means that airliner that's at 30,000 feet above me, and I'm at 3,000 feet, doing steep turns. I don't really care about the United flight above me at 30,000 feet. They're not a factor, right? I just want to see the traffic that's close to me. So I'm going to leave that on. And then I like traffic breadcrumbs as well. What that does is you can tap on a traffic hit. If you have ADS-B connected, you can tap on a little traffic hit, and it'll show you that aircraft's breadcrumbs. So you can see where that aircraft was flying from, and you can kind of see a general direction of where they're going. And the reason I like this is if I see breadcrumbs on a traffic hit that maybe departed an airport, went 5 miles south, started doing a bunch of turns and looks like steep turns and maybe spirals, and then they're headed back to the airport, I can assume that that's a local, airplane, and they're headed back to maybe be a factor in the traffic pattern there. Versus if I see somebody take off and they don't make any turns at all, and they start heading out and they're at 5,000 feet, and then it's like, okay, they're probably on a cross country going somewhere. They're not a factor. So you can help that, or I think it helps build your situational awareness while you're flying around. All right, the next thing we're going to cover is your briefing format. Right now, the briefing format I've got set to graphical HTML. You should have 2 options. You'll see 3 here on mine because I have a DoD, like a military flight bag option, so I can get Air Force weather. But even me using the Air Force weather, I prefer the graphical HTML. You can get the graphical PDF. It's not as good, I don't think, so I like the graphical HTML format of that. The last thing I'm going to talk about are the units in time. Now, the units in time is just that, the units in time for all the different settings. So I have times, like your time of day, right? Your wind speeds, pressure, temperature, visibility, coordinates, all of those you can change how those are displayed. The reason I bring this up is because the time is really important. If you're working on your instrument rating, for instance, everything is in Zulu time. So what I would recommend is I would start practicing in Zulu time, right? You can have Zulu time pulled up. I've got local time on my watch, so I like to have Zulu time selected. That way it lines up with some of the weather reports that I'm getting, because I've seen that on a check ride, especially where somebody forgets to make a Zulu time conversion, and they wind up not paying attention to a weather system that actually is a factor because they think it's at a different time. So having your app time settings set to Zulu, I think, is really helpful there. All right, so that's enough time on our settings page. Lots of settings here. Remember, you can use the search filter to search different settings. That's really useful on your iPad there. So let's go back to our map section. I'm going to show you a second group of settings. So remember, the first one, we hit on the More button and then go to Settings up here. The next one is just the gear icon that's on the main map page up here at the top, kind of center of the screen. We're going to tap on that gear icon. We can change our brightness here. We can invert colors. So there's some things we can do on this setting that we couldn't do on the other. We can change our auto center mode from north up to track up. We can change that. We can turn on and off our own ship distance rings, but like I said, remember, we can't change how those own ship distance rings are displayed in like nautical miles or time. You can only do that at the global settings. So some of these things you can turn on and off. One that I'll talk about is the mark positions. The mark position is kind of a cool feature. It allows you to mark a point. So we can mark a point and we can tag that point with information. So let's say you're out there flying in the area and you find a great place to do 8s on pylons. Just 2 perfectly set pylons and a good practice area. You could mark that point using the marked position and save it, and then go back to it, easily find it later. So that's something you can turn on and off. I've got mine turned off usually because I don't use that feature. Now, the thing I'm going to show you is the last option here is called multiple selections. We want to turn that on because we're fixing to talk about all the map layers that we have within ForeFlight, and multiple selections. Well, I'll show you what it does. So right now I've got it turned off. If I hit my layer selector window, my layer tray up there, whatever you want to call it, and I deselect VFR sectional, my layer selector is going to disappear. Well, I don't really like that. I like that layer selector to stay open so I can kind of pick and choose and add whatever I need. So I'm going to hit my settings. I'm going to go all the way down here. I'm going to turn multiple selections on. Now when I go to my layer selector, it stays open. I can select multiple different things here, and the layer selector never disappears. To me, that's super useful, so I like to have that setting turned on. So while we're here, let's talk about our layers. So the first layer that I would recommend that you have open is your aeronautical layer. This is what I have on all of the time within ForeFlight. Even if I have an underlying sectional or low chart or high chart, I'm always going to have my aeronautical layer turned on. And we'll talk more about the aeronautical layer here in a second. All right, the VFR sectional layer, you can have that on if you want. I typically fly with the sectional layer off. Now, if I'm flying over maybe some interesting terrain or a lake, you'll notice that the aeronautical layer doesn't always have the name of the body of water, for instance, or these cultural features. So I might say, hey, what is that body of water down there? So I can come down and I can turn on the sectional, and it will show me the name of the body of water that I'm flying over typically, or the name of the town. So sometimes that's good to have up, but generally speaking, I don't like the clutter that the sectional brings, so I'm going to leave that turned off. All right, now let's talk about these other layers that we have here. We've got radar, and to kind of the top right-hand side of the layer selector are my different types of weather that I can display. You can typically only select one of these at a time. So I've done a video recently about the difference between radar, radar classic, and lowest tilt, so I won't go back over that. And we got turbulence, we've got clouds, and then if you're a Performance Plus subscriber, you might also have something called the Hazard Advisor, which I'm not going to go into detail about because this is more of kind of a basic setup of ForeFlight. All right, then we have our traffic layer. Now the traffic is only going to be available if you're connected to some sort of data link. So right now I'm connected to cell coverage or Wi-Fi, so I have internet traffic. Now if I didn't have any connectivity, in fact, I'll show you what this looks like. I'm going to go to airplane mode, and so now I don't have any way I have no data link, so no internet connection, no cellular signal. And now if I go down, you can see that the traffic display has disappeared because I can't show traffic. But if I turn it back on, I turn out of airplane mode, and I click away from that, make sure that I have coverage there, the traffic display is back. So you want to make sure that this is set up, especially if you're on a Wi-Fi iPad and you're moving to the airplane, so you move away from internet signal, you get in the airplane, maybe you forget to turn ADS-B on your Stratus, your Sentry, whatever, you turn it on later, you may have traffic turned off still, so you want to make sure that you open up your layer selector and have traffic turned on, or you're not going to be able to see traffic. Next, I would suggest turning on the NOTAMs and TFR. That's going to show you graphical NOTAMs and TFR. You can also turn on the SIGMETs and AirMETs. And let's just take a look at SIGMETs and AirMETs for a second. This is the first one that's opened up a filter here at the bottom of the screen. So right now we've got all of our SIGMETs and AirMETs. I'm going to zoom out here so you can kind of see all those SIGMETs and AirMETs around the country. Let's say we're not worried about high turbulence, so we can turn that off. We're not worried about icing because, well, we've got an icing AirMET that's just to the north of us. And if we tap on it, you got to be careful where you tap. If you tap on traffic, it'll pull up traffic. If I can tap on that, it's only active at 10,000 feet. Well, we're not going to fly to 10,000 feet, so we can turn that icing layer off. So we just want to know about low turbulence, IFR, and our convective SIGMETs, which would be the TS, which are thunderstorms, right? So you can turn those on and off. So it's like a layer within a layer, if you want to think about it that way. All right, the GAFOR, I think that's a European thing. I typically leave that turned off. Custom airports, that's a new feature that's on there. And then the FAA cameras, that's a new feature that's on there. I'll show you my favorite one, and that is going to be my ceiling. So I love to have this ceiling pulled up. The reason is it gives me this nice color code for VFR, marginal VFR, IFR, or low IFR, and then it also gives me a 2-digit number that signifies the ceiling that airport is calling. So I get a lot of data at a quick glance. So it's kind of like those cool METAR boards that you see around, except it's giving you even more data. So I can know without looking at any more detail that Northwest Arkansas right now is marginal VFR, ceilings are 2,200 feet. So I know that's either a 2,200 foot broken or overcast layer. And if I tap on that, 2,200, sure enough, it pulls up Bentonville, broken at 2,200. So I didn't even have to tap on the airport to see that. That's a really good decision support system to have that pulled up. I may not have it pulled up all the time, but it's one of the quickest ways to gather kind of data quickly about the area that you're flying in. I really like that layer. All right, we're going to turn that off just for simplicity's sake to look at our map here. So like I was saying before, the sectional, all the information on the sectional you have on the aeronautical layer, or I'd say 99% of it, but you just have to access it in a different way. The first thing I'll show you is how to find special use airspace, information about special use airspace on the aeronautical layer without using the sectional. So I've got Arkansas pulled up here, and on my layer selector, I have NOTAMs turned on. Now watch how the map changes when I turn NOTAMs off. With NOTAMs off, I see some of my special use airspace disappeared, right? And if I go back up here and I turn NOTAMs back on, then I see special use airspace reappear, and then I also see that special use airspace maybe change color a little bit. And you can easily see that when you zoom out a bit, these red areas, that's active SUAS, so, or special use airspace. So if I tap on that airspace, this is going to give me more information. So I can see that that area is the Hog A military operating area. It's active on May 29th, surface to flight level 180, and it gives me the ZME, so that's Memphis Center, airspace information, okay? So I know that I would need to contact Memphis Center if I wanted to find out more about that Hog military operating area being active. And since I have NOTAMs pulled up, it's alerting me that, hey, that's active. Now, over here in central Arkansas, just north of Little Rock Air Force Base, I have a little gray box. If I tap on that little gray box, that says PJE scheduled. That's parachute jumping exercise. Active, surface to 2,500 between May 27th and May 31st. So, hey, there's parachute jumping activities happening within this airspace right here. That's something that I can alert myself to. So that's how you can find out more about special use airspace. Let's go up here to Missouri. Here's another LASMO I'll show you. If you long press on this, it will pull up. The slide bar will come over and you can see the different airspace. So we have the Truman B, the Kansas City FIR, or the Kansas City UIR. And we want to see the Truman B MOA. We tap on details. It gives us the upper lower limit and also frequencies of Kansas City that control that airspace. So you can actually get a lot more detail on the aeronautical layer than you can from the sectional layer. That's something that I really like. All right, now that we have the aeronautical layer pulled up, let me show you the filters for the aeronautical layer. This is really important. So over on the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to see a little button there. And that little button is going to bring up an additional layer that has VFR, low IFR, and high IFR. Now, each of these, you can change your own filters there, right? So this is pretty cool. It'll show you low IFR. Now that I bring up airways. If I go to high IFR, it will show my jet airways, those airways above flight level 180. Now, if I want to go back to VFR, and I want to hit the three buttons, the three ellipses at the bottom of VFR, and this pulls up another set of filters that I can change. So let's look at all of these, because these filters all are, it's good for you to at least know what's here and have it set in a known way, right? At least have a method to your madness here. So first are these text labels. I can change the labels and make them really large. You can see how that changed the text size on the aeronautical layer. Again, that's something you can't do on the sectional. It's a fixed text size. So this is a responsive text size. So if you're having trouble seeing that, you can turn up the text size there or turn it down. I've got place labels turned on. And again, this is just for VFR settings. So I go down to my VFR settings. I can change the type of airports that I want to see. And then I can also put in a min runway length, which I think is really useful. So let's say you're flying an aircraft and you really only want to know about runways that are at least 3,000 feet long. So I can tap on this, and I can slide the bar up to 3,000 feet. So now when I have the VFR layer selected, then I have a filter set where I'm only seeing 3,000 foot runway lengths or greater. Now, you may be thinking, well, if I have an emergency, I want to see all the runways. Well, luckily, there's a quick way to change that. And on the lower right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a blue flag, which is alerting us, hey, you have this filter. So I can tap on that, and I can change it immediately. I can change it easily to no filters. And that filter goes away, and now I'm seeing all of the runways. So it's something that typically when I'm flying a piston, I go ahead and leave that off. But when I'm flying C-130 or the 737 or a multi-engine aircraft, then I'm typically going to have that filter on, because I don't care about a little grass strip that's 1,500 feet. If I lose an engine or have an emergency, I'm going to fly to an airport with appropriate amount of length, and I don't want to have the screen cluttered up with all of these private use, really small grass runways. It's just a consideration for you to have. I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of these aeronautical settings here. I'm not going to go through each and every one of them. Just know that there's a lot that are there. Play around with them and have the settings what you think is best, right? Okay, so now let's go over to the documents section of ForeFlight. So on the documents section of ForeFlight, you have a lot of options here. Let's first look at the FAA drive of your document section. So let's say we're going to build a binder. I'm going to show you how to do this, and we're going to add to that binder things we might need for a VFR flight or check ride and an instrument flight or check ride. Okay, so let's say we're going to set our first one up is just going to be VFR. We want to have our VFR stuff ready, all nice and organized, and maybe we'll even go into these and we'll start adding our own bookmarks and annotations. So we've got the FAA drive pulled up, and over here to the right, we have a lot of different options. So first, let's go to our handbooks. If we were going to prepare for the private pilot check ride, we would want to have this private pilot ACS. When we open up the private pilot ACS and we tap the folder icon at the top, that's going to allow us to add it to a binder. So we're going to create our first binder, and we're going to call this binder VFR. So once we create the binder, we tap on the icon there. It gives us a blue check mark. Now the private pilot ACS is added to our VFR binder. And when we go back to our drives page, we can see we've got a VFR binder up here now. All right, so we're cooking along here. We've added our first document. Now let's think about, as a VFR pilot, what are some handbooks that I would want to have readily available? One might be the Airplane Flying Handbook, and one might be the PHAC. So I'm going to go over here and select the Airplane Flying Handbook, and I'm going to add that to my VFR binder. And then I'm going to close that back out. So now I want to add the, let's say the Aviation Weather Handbook to my VFR binder. So I could open it up, tap on it, and go through that process. The other thing I can do is just long press on it and drag it up into the binder. Go to my Aviation Weather Handbook, I long press on it and drag it up here to my VFR binder and release it, and it's added to my VFR binder. Now it still stays in the FAA Handbook binder. Don't worry, you don't move it out of that. It's just a quick way to add it to your binder. So we've got the weather added. We've got our airplane flying handbook. The last one that I might want to add is the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge. And we're going to go up and add this to our binder. So let's take a look at our VFR binder. We've got the ACS, the airplane flying handbook, the aviation weather handbook, and the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge. Now let's open up the aviation weather handbook. Let's say we're going to study this. So if we hit the little magnifying glass at the top of the screen, we can word search something. So if you had a topic, let's say thunderstorms. So we can type in thunder and click on that. It takes us to thunderstorms, and we can kind of word search through the document until we find the thunderstorm section that we're looking for. Okay, we could do that. Now, if we go to contents, this gives us an interactive link of all the different chapters. So we can, again, looking for thunderstorms, we could scroll down through here and see, oh, there's a thunderstorms chapter. Looks like it's in chapter 22. And we tap on that, and it automatically takes us to that page. So that's a really useful way to use the ForeFlight's document library. Now, let's say I go in here and I want to study thunderstorm types. And I want to bookmark this and come back to it later. So what I might do is if I tap on the screen here, I can tap on my little pencil at the top left-hand corner of the screen, and I can highlight. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to highlight this section here. And then I want to make sure that, hey, I want to bookmark this and come back and study later. I tap on the little bookmark, and I can just go ahead and add bookmark. You notice I didn't type anything in, so I add bookmark. Now when I go to my magnifying glass again and I go to the bookmarks tab, I can see that ForeFlight automatically named that bookmark to the page that I was currently on. So the default naming convention is it bookmarks it for the page that you're on. So that's one way to bookmark. Now let's say I go to a different page and I want to add a custom bookmark. Well, that's easy. I just tap on the bookmark and I can type out whatever I want. I'm going to type test here, hit add bookmark. Now when I go to the magnifying glass bookmarks, I can see that I've got a bookmark called test. Now the important thing to remember here is if the FAA comes and they update the weather handbook and they change the pages, that bookmark is for that page. So your bookmarks may be a little out of order, and that's a little frustrating, to be honest. So if you use bookmarks a lot, you may find that frustrating. I don't know that there's a way around that. Maybe in the future they'll have, a different way to bookmarking where that doesn't become a factor. But anyway, that's what we're dealing with now. Okay, so we've got our VFR binder built. Now let's add a new binder, and let's call this IFR. So for the IFR, we're just going to think about the documents that we might want for IFR flying. So let's go to our FAA document, and we want to go to our handbooks, and we're going to drag our our instrument rating airplane. We'll take our instrument rating airplane, we'll add that to our IFR binder. Okay, we also want the, let's say the Aeronautical Information Manual. That would be good. In fact, let's go ahead and add the Aeronautical Information Manual to our VFR binder too. I forgot about that one. That was an important one. And then if we scroll on down, we'll see that we've got the Instrument Flying Handbook. Yep, that's there. Let's add that. And then let's do the Instrument Procedures Handbook. So we've got all those added in here. All right. Then there's probably some other handbooks that might be useful. You just use your judgment on what you want to add. Now, one of my favorite ones that's in the handbook or in the library here is this Pilot's Guide to Pre-Flight Briefing. It's an advisory circular 9192. I'm going to go ahead and take that one and add it to VFR. And I'm also going to add that to the IFR because that's a really good advisory circular. Let me open it up and show you. I've done a couple videos on this. But just to give you an idea, we go to the back of this page, or the back of this advisory circular, and it's going to give us a sample pre-flight briefing checklist, which is really useful, right? These are all the things that we need to be briefing ourselves on before a flight, and it's a nice checklist format. And this advisory circular kind of talks you through how to give yourself a weather briefing using an EFB or your computer or whatever you happen to be using. So that's something useful to go in there. All right, as you can see, there's a ton of stuff to pull from the FAA drive here. So let's go to Legends. We might want to add our IFR low to the IFR, and we might want to add our VFR legend to the VFR, right? Those are important. And then we're missing a big one. That's our chart supplement, right? So our chart supplement, we could add our chart supplement for the area that we're operating in. Now there's a quicker way to get to a chart supplement, so let me show you that real quick. I don't actually add these to the binders because it's easily found on the map. So we go back to our map screen, and let's just tap on an airport. Let's say we tapped on Springfield Branson National. A quick way to find their chart supplement is to tap on the runway with the aeronautical mode up, and then scroll down until you see AFD, chart supplement, and tap on that, and it takes you directly to the Springfield Branson chart supplement. Now what's cool about ForeFlight is now I can go in here and I can make all sorts of annotations, and when I'm done with that and close it out, if I were to open up that chart supplement again, it saves my annotations. So if I was preparing for a check ride, I would make sure that all the airports that I could potentially go to, I've opened up their chart supplements, I've made annotations, maybe like, hey, this has a 4-degree glide slope, or this one doesn't have PAPIs, or this is right-hand traffic patterns. I could make all those annotations ahead of time and really prepare, and then quickly access them through the map page. So that's something that I access through maps and not documents, but you can do whatever you want to do. Next, we're going to look at the federal aviation regulations. So remember, I said this book right here, everything in this book you can find in ForeFlight, and this is what I mean. We already showed you where the Aeronautical Information Manual is. Let me show you where all the FARs are. So right here in the FAR library, and we've got several parts. I didn't count them all up. Last time I counted, though, there's more parts to the FAR in the ForeFlight drive than there is in the ASA's most current FAR AIM book. And these are kept up to date just like the ones on the paper version, only a little bit better because if these update, you automatically get an update when you update your ForeFlight, right? Whereas if this updates, the only way to update yourself is to buy a new FAR, or to buy a new book. Now, if we're wanting to add information to our library on the FARs, sure, let's do 61. Part 61 is important for both of these because that would include information about VFR, IFR certification rules. And then Part 91 would be important for both of those, right? Because that's our general flight rules there. So let's go into our IFR and let's open up Part 61 and hit the magnifying glass, go to contents, see how it's easy to navigate there. So we can go to our flight rules and scroll down until we get to our instrument flight rules. Flight rules, we can say, well, I really might need to know this on the check ride, or if I'm just filing IFR 91-167, which is our fuel requirements for IFR, flight and IFR conditions. And I can, guess what, go to bookmarks, bookmark that, add to bookmark, and now when I go to my magnifying glass and bookmarks, I've got that added there in my FARs as a custom bookmark. So that can be really useful. Okay, let's look at another drive we haven't looked at yet, which is chock full of great information, and that is the ForeFlight drive. So looking at the ForeFlight drive, the ForeFlight in the past, probably 2 years ago, they started restructuring this, and I think they took a step in the right direction. They renamed everything. Instead of giving it names, they started with the Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3, so on and so forth. So you can see how they've named that. The first one that I would add to both binders that you're using is the ForeFlight Mobile Pilot's Guide. So this needs to be in each one of your binders because everything that tells you anything about ForeFlight is in that binder. The next thing, the ForeFlight filing guide, I would put that in my IFR because I'm going to be using ForeFlight to file a lot of IFR flight plans. If I have a question, I need to use that document, and I'll show you some stuff in that document, which is really, really cool. Now, the rest of these, I may not add. The Legends Guide, that's pretty useful, especially if you're using the aeronautical layer a lot. The ForeFlight Legends Guide is super useful. In fact, I've got it pulled up on the flight category. So if you ever forget what the green, blue, red, and pink mean, it has a really nice color-coded table right there in the Legends Guide. So if there's something that you see there you don't know the answer to, you can find it in one of these ForeFlight handbooks here. Now, some other things that are good in here, it gives you the ForeFlight checklist guide, and then down at the bottom, you have the light gun signals. You can pull that up and you can see, hey, quickly navigate to see what a steady green or flashing red means if you've forgotten that. There's an AOPA folder that has what to do if stopped by law enforcement. It's kind of a guide to a ramp inspection. I think that's pretty good. And then what to do if you're intercepted, which is also, I hope you don't get intercepted, but if you do, that's a good thing to have there. Your MBAA, that might not be on every subscription, but it might be there. And then if you have a Sentry, it has your Sentry quick start guide and all that stuff there. So the ForeFlight, let's look at the ForeFlight Mobile Pilot's Guide first. So like I said, use the magnifying glass up at the top, go to your contents, and you can search around here. So it's topically organized here, and then you can also use the word search feature, which works really well. So if there's anything in ForeFlight that you don't know how to use, start at Alpha 1, your ForeFlight Mobile Pilot's Guide. More than likely, you're going to be able to find the answer there, either through the search bar or going through the contents. And then bookmark it, right? If it's something that you're interested in, bookmark that. Now let's look at the ForeFlight Filing Guide. Now this has some really good information in Chapter 2. So I know in the video that I did a couple of years ago, the FAA has a filing guide. In fact, it's still on here. Let's pull that up real quick so I can show you the difference here, because it's pretty striking. So let's pull up the ICAO Flight Planning Quick Guide. So this is the ICAO Flight Planning Quick Guide from the FAA. It has a lot of information on here, but it's a pamphlet format, so there's only 2 pages. It's not really formatted to be used digitally. It's formatted to be printed off and folded up in a pamphlet format. So it is what it is. It's not terrible, but it's not my favorite. So that's how much information the FAA gives you on how to file. Now let's look at the ForeFlight option. So ForeFlight Filing Guide. All the filing information is in Chapter 2. Now look how many pages are here of just great information. One of my favorites is, I'll show you over here on page, if you're following along with me, page 36. Okay, so on page 36, it actually gives me models of transponders, all these common models of transponders, and what surveillance code those transponders equal. And that's just super useful, right? So if you're following a flight plan in ForeFlight and you want to set up those modes and codes, as what I call them, correctly, using Chapter 2 of the filing guide is just incredibly useful. Everything you need to know is in this filing guide right here. So if you follow this and you have a question, if you still have a question, you can reach out to me at my email or on the Discord channel, and I'll try to do my best to answer. But more than likely, you're going to be able to answer it within the filing guide here on ForeFlight. It's just incredibly useful. So overall, I'm just a big fan of the work that ForeFlight has put into the guides that they have, kind of the user support that they have for their system here. I think it's really, really good. All right, one last thing that I'm going to cover is how to set up a basic performance profile for your aircraft. So on this, we're going to start at our map page here, and we're going to tap on the top left-hand corner. And I've already started to set up an example aircraft, and I just called it November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I've got November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 set up, and if I go into edit, this is what it looks like if you're building an aircraft from scratch. So you can see all the settings here. Now there's another place you can go to. If you tap on the 3 bars here at the bottom, and you go to your aircraft tab. This is going to pull up your aircraft tab, and this is where I like to edit things here. So if I'm going to add an aircraft, I'll add it from here. And notice I'll just have more screen space to work with. I think it's a little bit easier to enter in information. So I've entered in a tail number. I've got an aircraft type selected. So let's look at the aircraft types. Now, if you're on a Performance Plus subscription with ForeFlight, you're going to see some different options than if you were on a basic subscription. So on a basic subscription, I'm just going to see a Cessna 182, and it's not going to have any blue text below it. So it's going to look like this guy right here, right? See, there's no blue text. But if I'm on a Performance Plus subscription, I'm going to see the 182, the specific type, so a 182A, and then I'm going to see some blue text below it. So this blue text that designates that there's a ForeFlight performance profile, a takeoff and landing performance, and a weight and balance template available. So all that is ForeFlight has gone in for that specific make and model. They've entered in the data And so instead of you having to build a custom performance profile, they've built one for you using the data from the manufacturer. Now, the upside to this is obviously that's a little bit easier for you. You don't have to build it. The downside is you don't have as much control over that performance profile. So if you're taking a check ride, preparing specifically for the private pilot, I wouldn't suggest using a performance profile. I would suggest building a manual profile. But don't worry, even if you select one that has a performance profile, you can still add in a custom profile as well. So I'm going to go back to say, well, we're in a 182J. And actually, we're going to ignore that because I already have one selected. So it looks like I've got 182. Yeah, 182J is selected. And so that's in there. If I scroll down to my performance section, this is where I can change my runway profile. Now, that's serial number specific, and there might be multiple options. So you want to make sure the right serial number is selected. And then I can change my performance profile. So right here, see how I have a custom performance profile named Basic. So this is really important. I'm building a custom performance profile. I want to fill out all of the fields available. So I want to give it a unique profile name, and then I want to put in my cruise, my climb true airspeed, fuel flow, and climb rate, my cruise true airspeed and fuel flow, and my descent true airspeed, fuel flow, and descent rate. I want to make sure all of those are in there per the manufacturer's guidance. Now, what you want to do is you plug all these in, you go plan a flight, you go fly the flight that you planned, you come back and you analyze and you see how close you were. The goal I give everybody is you want to make sure if you're doing a 150 nautical mile flight, you want to make sure you're within about 10% of both time and fuel expected. So if you plan a flight and you go out and execute the flight and you use more than 10% of the fuel that you thought you were, or you were 10% further off of time control, then you need to continue fine-tuning that performance profile until you get within the 10% range. So that's how I would build a custom profile. Now let's look at the ForeFlight profiles. So for this one, we're just going to look at the 2300 RPM profile. Now notice I don't see any of the airspeeds and I don't see any of the fuel flows, but I do have this bias option where I can increase or decrease the bias. And so the way you use this to fine tune is, let's say you take off and you've used more fuel than you thought you did. And you roughly think that it's about 5% more fuel. So I would add a 5% positive fuel bias. And that should fine-tune my plan to where I'm using exactly the amount of fuel that I have. Because that's the goal. You want your performance profile to be as precise as possible. Now, some people will say, well, and maybe I've even done this in the past, of like, well, you could say, well, I'm going to add a 5% buffer here for my fuel flow. So the plan always thinks I'm using 5% more fuel than I actually am. That's one way to build in some safety margin there. So let's look at another way you could do that, though. Go back. And we're going to get out of the performance profile, and we're going to scroll down until we get to the fuel section. And in the fuel selection, I'm going to be able to set my reserve fuel policy and my reserve minimum. So right now, my default reserve minimum for this plane and any other piston plane that I fly is 60 minutes. So I can set my reserve fuel policy right here. The other thing that's really important is to set your start taxi takeoff fuel here. Now this is coming straight out of the manual. If you add it from ForeFlight performance profile, it's going to be the default, whatever's on the type certificate for that airplane that's built in. If you don't have Performance Plus and you're using a custom profile, you need to enter this information in yourself. And so this is where I would change my start taxi takeoff fuel, my fuel units, my type, my total usable fuel, and then my default reserve fuel is all going in here. And remember, we talked about our filing codes. I can also set that up in this as well. So there's one other place, though, we need to add our aircraft. So we've added our aircraft to our performance profile. Now if we're going to use the logbook, we would want to go in and go to our logbook and scroll all the way down on the left-hand side and go to our logbook aircraft, and we would want to add the aircraft that we just added in performance. We'd add it to our logbook. And the only difference is when we're adding an airplane to our logbook that isn't included in the performance profile is we're going to put in the category and class and the gear type and whether or not it's complex, TAA, high performance, pressurized, all that. You can add a picture, and that'll make sure that when we log things in our logbook, we're logging appropriately single engine land, multi-engine land, that sort of deal. So that's the second place that you add your aircraft. Now, there is a third place that you may want to add information about that aircraft, and that's on your weight and balance. So your weight and balance, that's a totally separate section. And if I've chosen a Performance Plus, let's see if I have it here. Yep, I've got the November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's my airplane, and here's my weight and balance profile. Now I'm going to do a video, and I've done videos in the past of how to set this up. My preference when I'm setting up a weight and balance profile is to do that on a desktop computer on ForeFlight's website. The reason is the website makes it, I think, a little bit easier to set up than the app. That's just a personal preference of mine. But when I set it up on the website, I just think that works a lot better. So that would be my recommendation. All right, finally, the last place you may want to add an aircraft or aircraft-related item is in the checklist section. So we're going to open up our checklist section. Now, ForeFlight has some great checklists. One that I recommend everybody install right now as soon as you get ForeFlight is hit the plus sign at the top there, and you're going to scroll all the way to the bottom. Now, at the bottom, you're going to have the EFB pre-flight checklist, and you can give it a name if you want. It's just optional, and just hit done, and you're going to add that. And I'll show you, I've already got mine added here. This pre-flight planning checklist takes you through every step of making sure that your iPad's charged, making sure you have a backup iPad or your iPhone's charged, your backup battery, you have charging cables, that you've got the appropriate data for the flight, like you've packed the flight, you've downloaded it, you've briefed it, you've got the weather planned, your flight planning's done, your final actions, all that's in there. If you're taking a check ride, part of the check ride is going to be risk management and aeronautical decision making. If you show your examiner that you have a purposeful, well thought out and professional checklist on how to pre-flight this iPad, which is actually a pretty critical safety item in the airplane. If you show me that you're using this checklist and it's part of your habit pattern, man, that's just such a great piece of risk management that you're doing, and it's going to make you a safer pilot. So I highly recommend that you use this EFB pre-flight checklist. Now let's say we want a checklist for our airplane. So we can tap on the search bar, select a template, and we can find a 182. And sure enough, a 182 is there. We don't see a 182J, so we have to get as close as we can. So we can select a 182Q, and we can add it here. And now we've got a 182Q Skylane checklist. The neat thing is I can go in and I can change things as required. So for instance, let's say that for some reason I want to check my, I want to check my fuel quantity indicators before I turn on the master switch to make sure that they're reading 0. And I don't know, let's just say that that's what I want to do. So I can hit edit, and I can grab that fuel quantity indicator and I can move it. I can also hit the edit icon, and I can change the name and add something else there, or I can delete it. Also, while I have the edit window open, I can go down and I can add a new check item or a new detail item. So up here at the top, cabin, that would be a check item, and then the pilot operating handbook, that's a detail item. So I can add those as required over here, right? So I can hit done on that checklist. Now on the checklist over here, I can actually add an entire section of a checklist. So I can go to edit here, and I can edit my lists or edit subgroups. So this is a highly editable document. And if you spend some time using this checklist feature, I think you might really like it. The other thing that I like about it, it has this caution tab here. If I tap on that, it automatically takes me to my emergency checklist. So you can access this pretty quickly in flight if you have some sort of emergency. And if there's an emergency that isn't in your POH that you've covered with your instructor that you want to add, you can add a custom checklist in here. So I just think the digital checklist option is really cool. There's even a way that it will speak the checklist. So if I tap speak, it will start reading off my checklist at a certain rate that I can change in the settings menu. So it's just really cool. I think the digital checklist for ForeFlight is really, really useful. Okay, now let's look at our imagery tab. Imagery is where we can kind of get weather information on a a la carte basis. So let's say I wanted to look at a prog chart, I could find it here. Let's say I wanted to look at my clouds coverage for the next 6 hours, I can look at it here in imagery. And the cool thing is I can have some custom stuff that I've saved, sort of like a bookmark. So let's say I want to see the latest surface analysis. I'm going to star that item, and I'm going to star some other things. If I go up here and I tap on my star, I can see a list of all my favorite charts, and I can do that pretty quickly without having to scroll through everything. So you can kind of build your own little kind of pre-flight weather briefing looking at imagery right here in the imageries tab. It's pretty useful. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about our flight section. So if we go to down here at the bottom, go to our flights tab, and I was playing around with a flight yesterday, so I'm just going to click on this one. This is your flights tab. This is where you would go to file your flight plan or pull up a nav log. So let's say a common question I get is, can I use ForeFlight on the check ride, or do I have to make a paper nav log? The answer is ForeFlight generates a paper nav log for you. So what I would do is I would go to my flights page after I build my flight, send it to flights, go to my nav log, and here's my PDF nav log here. Now I can actually change the way that this looks. I can tap on the gear icon and I can change it to a basic nav log. And now it looks a little bit different. So I can take this and I can hit the share with button and I can send it to ForeFlight documents. Okay, now this is in my documents tab. I go back to my documents tab. I go to imported and I can see here's my flight plan that I just created on today's May 29th is right here. So I can take this, let's say that's what I was going to do for my VFR flight. Sure enough, I can pull it over and add it to my VFR binder. So now my nav log is over here in my VFR binder. And what I can do, the nice thing about this is I can annotate this. So I can tap on the annotation tool, I can write whatever I want on my nav log, and it's there, right? So this is actually really useful to practice on your cross countries or for your check ride, is to have your static nav log created right here. Now remember, ForeFlight is not going to account for magnetic deviation. That's the deviation caused by interference within your cockpit. The little compass deviation card is in your airplane. That's not on here. So that might be something you want to add to like manually write in on the nav log here, just to consideration for you to make. All right, the last thing that I'll cover, or maybe two more things that I'll cover, are your Scratchpads. So on your Scratchpad, you have a lot of different types of Scratchpads that you can add. You can draw, type, grid, you can do a craft Scratchpad, ATIS, PIREP, takeoff and landing information or holding. There's a lot of different things you can add in here. So the Scratchpad, I think, is a really useful tool. Me personally, I don't actually use the Scratchpad that often because I do, from the maps page, I do corner gestures with my iOS device. So I swipe up from the bottom right-hand corner like that, and it pulls up a note automatically. Now, if you have corner gestures turned off, the way to turn those on is to go to your iOS settings and go to the very top and search corner. So you're just going to search corner gestures and you're going to tap on the first option. And then down here on the bottom right, you're going to see swipe finger from corner, and that's going to swipe up from the bottom right. We'll take a quick note, and swipe up from the bottom left. We'll take a screenshot, which I think is really useful, right? I'll show you a use case of the screenshot real quick because I think this is kind of cool. So let's go to our flights page, okay? And let's say we wanted to compare this nav log to, we're going to change two different nav logs. So we'll change some stuff here. So we're going to update our current time. We're going to have us depart as now, and I've got my performance profile set up as full throttle performance profile. So 2300 RPM, max manifold pressure, this performance profile, departing now. So let's take a look at our nav log, and this is what it looks like. So I'm going to take a screenshot of this, and I would make an annotation, say in 2300, let's say. Okay, so I've added a screenshot there, and I'm going to save to photos. So now I'm going to go back to my flights page, And I'm going to change from 2300, I'm going to take it to 2000 RPMs. Okay, so I want to do a 2000 RPM and then max manifold pressure flight plan. I'm going to go to that nav log and I'm going to refresh this. And what I'm going to do is basically compare how did this change my nav log here. So I can swipe up from the bottom right and write in 2000. So now I have pictures of both of my nav logs that I can compare quickly. So if I swipe up, go back to my home screen of the iPad and I swipe down and I want to search the app called Freeform. So, and then Freeform as the search function, I'm going to make a new board. Now I use Freeform app all the time because it's really useful. So I'm going to tap on this little image here and go to photos and videos. And I'm going to select those two images that I just saved. And they're going to pop up here. And now using the Freeform app, I can kind of resize these, make them easier to read here. And I've got both nav logs pulled up that I can compare side by side. So that's just a small example, I was using as a test case. You can do that for a lot of different things to make your use of the EFB maybe a little more better, we'll call it. Okay, so now last thing that I'm going to cover are some quick gestures if you're new to the iOS app. So for this, you're not going to be able to see what I'm doing on the screen. I'll just describe what I'm doing with my hand. So if I want to go back to the home screen, I take 4 fingers at least, and I squeeze in, kind of a pincher movement with my whole hand, and that will always take me back to my home screen. Opens up my home screen. Now, I'm going to open up ForeFlight. Let's say that I want to open up another app in like a slide over option. So I'm going to swipe up from the bottom, and that opens up my system tray down here. And I just had Freeform app open, so I'm going to use that. So I'm going to take Freeform app, I'm going to pull it up and long press and hold it up, and it's going to open it up in a slide over option. So now if I go up here to the top, I can slide Freeform app out of the way, and if I grab this handle, I can go over here to the right, there we go, grab the handle and slide it back, and it opens it back up. So that's kind of the slide over option. Now, with the slide over option, I have these 3 ellipses up here. If I tap on those 3 ellipses, I can go to split screen. And I want the Freeform on the left side and ForeFlight or Freeform on the right side, ForeFlight on the left side. So, and I can resize this using the split view. If I want to exit split view, I just tap on the 3 ellipses and go back to full screen. So that's an option that you have there. Notice that my notes are still down here. If I hit done, it disappears entirely. And remember, we got those corner gestures turned on. So if I swipe up, it opens my note back up. So I think that's a really useful tool. Now let's say you have 2 applications open and it was the last one you opened. You're going to use 4 fingers and you're going to swipe across the screen, and it's going to swipe in between those 2 applications. Really useful. Now let's say you have multiple applications open and you want to see all the applications that you have open. You're going to swipe up from the very bottom of the screen all the way to the top, and it's going to open up all of the applications that you have open, and you can scroll through and find the one that you want, tap on it, and it'll open it back up. So that's a quick way to get to an application using some of those gestures. Just a few of the gestures that I use on a day-to-day basis that make it easier to use. Now, ForeFlight also has some built-in gesture functionality. And so what I'm going to do to demonstrate this is I'm going to build a quick route from Russellville to, let's say, KMKC. I was just flying up there. So you notice we've got Russellville all the way up to Kansas City, and our route line, we can't see where it goes, right? We're not zoomed out enough. So if you take 3 fingers and you tap on the map with 3 fingers, it automatically zooms to fit your route within that zoom function, if that makes sense. So if I make a longer flight, let's do H&L, which is out at Honolulu. So now I've got a point that's way out there at the Pacific Ocean. If I do 3 fingers, it should zoom way out. Let's see what happens. 3 fingers, there we go. Sure enough, it zooms all the way out to show that the Honolulu VOR is way out there. So that's a couple of gestures that you might find helpful if you ever get lost on the map of ForeFlight. You want to quickly pull up your route. All right, I've been talking long enough. Hopefully you've learned some stuff about ForeFlight, the built-in functionality with those documents page. hopefully you found that useful. Of course, I didn't show my ACE guide. Maybe I should have, but if you put the ACE guide in your document section, it makes navigating way easier. So if you haven't ever seen that before, check out the ACE guide. I'll show you that at a future date. We got an update coming out soon. But anyway, thanks so much for watching the VSL Aviation YouTube channel. Hope you found it useful. We'll see you next time.